Thank you. Just on the point about being Dean of the Business School, which I've been doing for now about 2 years. And it was a great opportunity, really, because they were going through an accreditation process, a process that started 6 years ago. I know this is an acronym-free zone, but it's called AACSB, which means it's an accreditation process for collegiate business schools across the world. And started in 2012 at Bournemouth, and so culminated in a visit this year back in March, where we, a bit like those of you who remember doing things like subject review, it was a 4-day visit. They met all the stakeholders, businesses, students, academic staff, so the potential for things to go wrong were very high. And there was a lot of pressure on us to make sure we got this. And we did achieve accreditation, 5 years. It was a fantastic outcome for all the staff there. Very proud of that. But one of the things was that what happens is that you get recommended by the panel for accreditation, and then that goes to a committee. And this committee was being held in Honolulu, in Hawaii. And they said, well, after you've been accredited by the committee, you get presented with the award. So I thought, fantastic. So I rang my wife and said, get prepared. We're going to go to Honolulu for a lovely, presentation, and then perhaps have a week there and, on the beach and all this sort of thing. And this was going to be in July. Anyway, I rang them just to check details, and they said, oh, no, you don't come to this one. You come to the next meeting and receive it then. And I thought, and they said February. So I said, okay. And I thought, well, maybe it's in the southern hemisphere. It'd be a lovely, I don't know, South America, South Africa, something. And I said, where is it? And they said, Glasgow. Now, I don't want to offend all our Scottish colleagues I love Glasgow. I've been there many times. But it really wasn't the same. Glasgow in February. Problem was I then had to ring my wife. This is, as Liz has already mentioned, this is Bournemouth. Bournemouth, for those who don't know, is right down on the south coast in the county of Dorset. It's famous for a lot of things, not least its beautiful sandy beaches, 7 miles of sandy beaches. And I just wonder, how many people have been there for sort of summer holidays, or anybody in the audience? Yeah, quite a few. It's a really common destination, a lovely environment. And I think on an average August day, they have an extra 100,000 visitors on the beaches. So you can imagine, so that wasn't an August day, you can see there. And then, of course, you've got the famous Jurassic coastline with Durdle Door. You've got at the top there the Cobb. People might recognise that. Lyme Regis. It's in the French Lieutenant's Woman. Meryl Streep in a cape standing on the end. People might remember that movie. And of course, we have a Premiership football team. And I tell you what, that is the greatest marketing product outcome you could possibly want. I go, as Liz said, I go to China, I go to Turkey, I go to Nepal, and so on. And in China once, this guy, I said, I'm from Bournemouth University, and he came up and he said, oh, Eddie Howe. And I said, what? He says, manager of Bournemouth Football Club. And he knew everything about the Premiership. And so actually, it's been a fantastic, we do a lot of work, Bournemouth University, with the football club, and we're very proud of that. And the other thing people might not know is that there's a place called Sandbanks, which is right on the coast, and it's the fourth most expensive real estate in the world. There's only about 70 or 80 houses there, but I think they're worth about 600 million. So there's people sitting on piles of money, and it's not full of sort of wealthy people, it's just fortunate people who happen to live there. So moving on. Now, the other thing about Bournemouth University and why this is relevant to what I'm going to talk about today is Tim Berners-Lee, who's the inventor of the internet, lived and worked in Dorset. Didn't have a really strong association with Bournemouth University per se, but it actually has spawned quite a lot of digital companies locally. And Bournemouth University has a very strong computer animation department. And many of its graduates have been nominated for Oscars, parts of teams nominated for Oscars. And in fact, won Oscars in the last couple of years for the movie Inside Out and Ex Machina. And has also done work on films as diverse as Inception, Interstellar, Mad Max, Star Wars, and so on. And so, actually, they've got a great resource for students to learn about computer animation. We're starting to look at how can we integrate what we do in healthcare with what we do in computer animation. And one of the things about all those movies, they are science fiction. They give us a glimpse into the future and the sort of what's possible. And one of the pieces of work I've been doing locally is with Dorset Clinical Commissioning Group. And they are for those who aren't familiar with our system, really they're the body that commission services. So they're really in control of huge budgets and commission services. And they've recently become one of the few integrated care systems. So this is really important because it actually liberates them a bit. It gives them much more freedom around how they spend their money. Because what they did, they put in something called a sustainable and transformation plan, which indicates how they're going to transform services to be much more digitally enabled, primary care led. I mean, this will be, I think, for Kathy, it's about looking at population. It's driven by health rather than sickness, and the intent is to move power away from the sort of acute hospitals into much more primary care and public health-led service provision. Because as Kathy rightly said yesterday, the system is currently unsustainable in its current form, and the integrated care system integrates health, social care, primary, secondary care, public health, education, and so on. And they only had their blueprint passed by government recently, and it gives them really direct line into the Department of Health and is an exciting opportunity for Bournemouth University. The Klaus Schwab, who's the CEO, some of you may or may not know this chap, he's the chief exec of the World Economics Forum, and he talks about us being in the midst of a fourth industrial revolution. And the first was, as on the left, mechanized production, then it went into mass production, then automation, and now we're in the fourth revolution, which is all about cyber and physical systems, really where sort of bio and mechanical systems, computers, are the lines between them are becoming more and more blurred. And with machines becoming much more thoughtful and nimble. And we're seeing massive change in communication, in transport, in retail, in entertainment, and so on. And really, the pace of change has no precedent in terms of the previous three industrial revolutions. It's happening before our eyes. And when I was working with the clinical commissioning group, one of the things we started to do was just start to scope some of the innovations, some of the new technologies that are around, particularly primary care. And if you look across the sort of patient journey now or the service user journey from first contact with services right through to sort of diagnostics and treatment, we have many devices now that can automate previously manual activities. Things like LifePatch, which is a temperature monitoring device that can be attached to children to alert their parents to changes in temperature. And similarly, in VisiMobile, there's vital signs can be monitored remotely. There's also things like automated triage processes, systems to improve provider efficiency, such as teletracking and Blue Prism. there are robotics, and some of these are already active in some hospitals, but where they can dispense and deliver treatment, drugs, even patients, and so on. And this technology is only going to advance even further. And then there's software and hardware that allows the storage and sharing of patient information, charting, recording, and so on. And then, of course, there's advice and navigation apps. There's digital platforms to allow for remote interactions. There's remote diagnostics and care, the organisation called Babylon. Ingestible products that can monitor drug reactions and drug adherence, and of course multiple apps that can monitor exercise, food intake, and provide education and so on. And then when you add to that the sort of possibilities around big data that allow the sort of targeted prevention based on predictive analytics, for improving decisional support. And then there's things like the multi-omics approach to disease, being able to assess outcomes, risks, and promote sort of public health campaigns to change behaviour and so on. So very exciting. And then you add all this to notions of connected health. So connected health is around using technology to provide personalised, interconnected, mobile, proactive and data-driven connectivity. And this is really exciting. So if we look at somebody, this lady here, Jean, 52, type 1 diabetes, there are now, the technology allows her to track her blood sugar and to adjust dosage of insulin to suit her level of activity, access information, chat to people in the same situation, consult experts through chat or video conferencing, receive nudges and reminders to exercise and so on. And actually diabetes is something that I've grown up with, and not personally. My father was type 1 diabetic. He was diagnosed in the 1940s. So you can imagine that treatment at that time was completely different. And I can remember the paraphernalia that my dad had to have in the house at that time. Big jars of white spirit and sterilising equipment and test tubes with tablets and goodness knows what. It was like Breaking Bad. I don't know if anybody has seen that. So, and in contrast to that, my sister, who's a couple of years older than me, she's also a type 1 diabetic, but she's wearing a continuous glucose monitoring device, much like suggested the Jean here. And that monitors everything about, and the technology that enables her to live a very active life. My father, he died 20 years ago, but he was registered blind in the end. He lost his sight through diabetes. My sister has no sight problems. She's been able to exercise because it's much more refined. And a lot of this is down to the technology that is now available. One interesting fact is that Theresa May wears the same device as my sister. I don't know if people know that. And there is no truth in the rumour that Boris Johnson hacked into that device and caused her to do some robotic dancing when she heard an African band. So imagine the future of healthcare. So you have a need, you contact the health service, and an avatar responds to you online through a sort of digital platform. And through some sort of monitoring device, it's able to assess your health. It can look at your DNA profile and look at your life risks and health risks. It can diagnose. It can then send a drone with your treatment, your specific personalised medication, or it could send a robot to conduct a bit of surgery in your lounge. Or it could inject you with nanorobots that go along your bloodstream and can attack the problem at source. My goodness, what could possibly go wrong? But of course, in health, interestingly, although these technologies, I mean, we are looking at possibilities in the future, but in health, actually, the take-up of technology has been much slower than in other areas. So if you look at things like, Spotify, e-commerce, and mobile banking, the take-up across the world has been very significant, very rapid. So why isn't the same in health? And there are several reasons for this. And, of course, Liz touched on this, generational issue. So Mark Prensky coined the term, who's a writer on technology. He coined these terms, digital immigrants and digital natives. And really anybody, probably most people in this room would be considered digital immigrants, in that we've had to adapt to a digital environment. And perhaps we're more fearful, sceptical, suspicious, and so on. Of course, if you've worked in the NHS and seen some of the travesties of technological intervention, then it's right that you're sceptical. And then there are those who perhaps have grown up in the last couple of decades where they've been surrounded by technology. They've grown up with it. They're much more familiar with it. They know the language. They're known as the digital or net generation, and they are the digital natives. They're familiar with computing, with gaming, with the internet, and feel much more comfortable with it. But actually, that sort of argument is sort of nice, but it's a bit simplistic. And there is a body of work around what's called technology acceptance model. This was put together in the 1980s by Davis and colleagues. And what they suggest is that they were looking at the sort of barriers and enablers to technological acceptance, particularly in health. And really, there are two areas. One is the perceived usefulness of a particular technology. Will it enhance my job? And of course, the ease of effort. If it's too much effort, we won't use it. So, but this model has been extended, and of course in health, one really important point is, will our peers accept it? Will our colleagues use it? Will our service users want it? Will they accept it as well? And more importantly, is it safe to use? Is it safe? Can it be hacked? And so on. And these are the things that people in healthcare, I think this is why there's been a slower uptake of technology, and probably rightly so. And we need to understand attitudes. And some of the writers, some people may know of Sherry Turkle. She wrote a very famous book called Second Self, Computers and the Human Spirit. Sherry Turkle is currently the Abbey Rockefeller Morsey Professor at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And she wrote a lot about the dehumanizing effect of technology, and really computers increasingly defining the way we think and act. And she said that the computers, the risk of technology is that they diminish the human spirit. And there is a constant threat to the I, the personhood, through this. And this isn't being against technology, and I'll come on to that in a second. And another writer in this area is Joseph Weizenbaum, and he's another MIT professor of computer science, and actually considered the father of artificial intelligence. And he talks again about computers being linear, logical, and rule-bound. And actually what that then makes us do is privilege instrumental reason over human engagement and interaction. And really, he says it's the capacity to choose that makes us human. And of course, in healthcare, that capacity, as someone, and like I know colleagues in the room, have written about patient and service user involvement in decision-making, in education, to promote that compassion is a really important component. And so how is this going to happen? How does this sit within a digitized, increasingly digitized world. And some of the predictions are that robots are going to replace some of us, some of our central status as healthcare providers could be shifting. So how are we going to respond to that? And what Weizenbaum said is that computers should never replace roles in which you need care, respect, and judgment. And he included healthcare practitioners, police officers, soldiers, judges, therapists, and customer care people. And it'll be interesting to see, will automation change all that? Because much of this technology, I don't see real service user, patient, or indeed healthcare engagement in the technology development, and that's a big issue. And you only need to think about the automated telephone answering machine to get a sense at how little user and what it's like to be stuck on the end of one of those. And actually, interestingly, you now see sort of callback systems which are perhaps a little bit better. And of course, healthcare surveys, multiple healthcare surveys of patients who use our services tell us that they want person-to-person contact. They want engagement. They want to be treated with respect, with compassion. Robin Youngson wrote in the, published recently in the BMJ around sort of what's the evidence for compassion impact on health outcomes. And it is growing. There are studies, trials that have been done that shows that an improvement in clinical outcomes, particularly around wound healing in post-operative care. And people in emergency departments are 30% less likely to return if they're treated with compassion and respect. It reduces costs of interventions, improves quality of life, and prolongs survival in cancer patients. And of course, compassion-based care gives meaning and joy and satisfaction to nurses and to healthcare workers working in the profession. That's often the reason they came into healthcare in the first place, because it aligns with their ideals to be health professionals and, of course, can protect against burnout. I'm doing some work on with Janet Scammell at the moment on looking at attrition with some of our local trusts. And you know, one of these surveys we came across was this one by the NMC. Why do people leave the profession? There are multiple reasons, but one of the key ones is disillusionment with the quality of care provided to patients. And a lot of that is around sort of burnout and inability to provide compassionate care because they don't have time. And so person-centered care, compassionate care is good for patients, it's good for healthcare workers, and it's good for service providers. And we need to hang on to that, because how can this stack up in an increasingly automated world, and what should we be doing about it? And this is the question: can compassionate person-centered care be delivered in an increasingly automated, digitally driven world? Of course, when there's an absence of compassion, we get tragedies occurring. Now, I know that probably people in this audience are probably a little bit fed up of listening to mid-staff's accounts because it's been regurgitated over and over again. The trouble is, more seem to happen. And what my colleagues down in Bournemouth, people may, and Kate Galvin, she's left now, but Les Todrus wrote a lot about humanly sensitive care, and I'll come on to a bit about that. But what I would suggest, and I know there's an excellent paper in Nurse Education today at the moment written by Philip Derbyshire around the Gosport War Memorial tragedy, but I would suggest it's where this happens where the system is God, but not clinical judgment, where the system overrides care, and people just go along with it. They don't question it. They don't intervene. And the abuses that happen across Morecambe Bay, Mid-Staffs, Southern Health, Gosport War Memorial, and so on, are there. And you just read those reports and you can bring out some of the sort of common characteristics. And humanising care is about listening to users. And Galvin and Todres, when they wrote about this, they said there were two central pillars to having a humanised focus on human-centeredly care. They said, and it wasn't just about leadership or time, although they're important. One of them was a distinctive and simple vocabulary that keeps the focus on humanising issues as a central concern and ensuring that that focus is coherently championed at all levels. And that's political, organisational, practical, educational, you could add to that digital, and academic. Humanism should be the narrative that runs through all of these developments. And their research, they asked the simple question of service users. Sorry, the thing's gone up a bit, but it's what makes people feel more or less human? And they came up with this conceptual framework. And on the left-hand side, those things that improve humanisation and improve sort of personhood and a sense of being cared about. And those things on the right-hand side are forms of dehumanisation, where people felt less engaged, less satisfied with the care they were receiving. I'm not going to go through all of these because there's too many there. But if you just take uniqueness versus homogenisation, none of us like to be homogenised, I would suggest. We all like to feel that we're recognised for our uniqueness. And of course, we're more than the characteristics that are listed, our age, our gender, and so on. It's about our contexts, our relationships. It's about our carers, our friends, our family, and so on. And similarly, in embodiment versus reductionism, it's not just about our biology. We're not just, the appendicitis in bed 3 or the Parkinson's person. We are, characteristics of our psychosocial and cultural characteristics that make us the person we are. And that's expressed through our reason, our morality, our consciousness. And of course, the overemphasis on digital processing of people, the greater automation, I would suggest, increases the likelihood of greater dehumanisation and loss of personhood. I wonder, actually, if Galvin and Todres repeated their research with the next generation, would they get different results? Would they come up with a different list? But I suggest not, because personhood is still personhood, whether you live in a digital age or grew up in it or you've had to adapt to it. And I'm not saying technology is a bad thing. I love my gadgets. I love the fact that all my gadgets speak to each other. I love the fact that I can monitor my exercise. I love the fact that I can speak to my son who's currently in India, travelling India by FaceTime, and it's great. I love all that. But to suggest that we can stop the advancements of technology because they're inherently a risky thing would be a bit like King Canute, standing on the beach down at Bosom, telling the tide to stop. It's not going to happen. However, and of course, if you look around the world, and I'm sorry I haven't got all 18 strategies from every country here, but just a flavour of what's going on around the world. Each of these, and there's 5 here, Canada, Australia, Europe, Scotland, all have their digital health strategies and are looking really carefully at how are they going to transform healthcare, because going back to what Kathy said yesterday, the system is pretty unsustainable, and the digital response is seen by many as the answer. The white knight, the cavalry coming around the corner. But I would suggest there are risks, huge risks, to blindly accept this narrative and to stand by passively while all this happens. And I think we, academics, nurses, students, health professionals, wherever we are, can help shape this. And in fact, digital companies, techie companies, are asking for help because they recognise this problem, that some of what they're producing creates a dehumanising effect, and they want to be much more person-centred in what they're doing. And we need a humanising force. And Todra's talks about we should be that humanising force that moderates technological process. We should be in there, not just letting it happen in practice, or indeed one could apply some of this to what's happening in education as well. And what humanism, in this sense, it's an ethic. The way where I'm coming, it's an ethical worldview which respects human rights. It defends the ideals of democracy and inclusiveness, and takes a tolerant view and is open, and also accepts that science respects science as a road to discover truth. And of course, there is a lot of work already, and if you survey universities at the moment, there are digital anthropology departments springing up, and they're starting to look at what's happening around technology. And this is great. It's great that these things are happening, but what I'm arguing for is a digital humanism. Because digital humanism is actually about shaping the future, not standing back and watching what happens. It's being in there, helping shape the narrative. And digital humanism takes the view that people are the central focus of the manifestation of digital technology. And Milad Douaihi, who's a professor at Paris Sorbonne, who's he's a humanist, talks about digital humanism is the affirmation that current technology in its global dimension is creating a new culture, and it creates a new context on a global scale. And of course, there are both positive and negative aspects to this. And we read about some of the negative consequences of the internet. You know, Amazon as the death of the high street, the access to paedophiles through the internet and Facebook. You know, these are the dark side of technology. And I'd add to that the potential for dehumanization. And what Martin Recke, who's a speaker on digital technology, works for a company called Sinneschrader, and he says that things like Alexa, Siri, independent cars, smart robots, and so on, are all taking us along the same journey, that there's a greater interdependence between humans and machines, and that it's essentially a good humanistic design which would place the desires and needs of humans ahead of the most convenient or accurate solution. One of the problems with technological solutions is often they're designed by technologists, and they'll go straight to a great solution without thinking of the process and the people that need to be involved in the development of that technology. And so what Recke is saying is it's a move away from computer-literate people to people-literate technology. So essentially what I'm talking about here is that we need to contribute to the fusion between the sort of research and innovation, the education, and the professional practice in order to shape this future, this digital future. And I do think there's a certain degree of urgency around some of this. And so I've started to look what's happening. So what's happening particularly in the UK, because it's an area I'm most familiar with. And if you look at the NMC recently published standards, what do they say about technology? Well, they've certainly indicate that all our nurses should come out with, and there are similar things in the Health Professionals Council standards as well, that they should come out with digital and technological skills. They should be able to manage commonly used devices and share and apply information, which is all great, but it's very passive. I think it doesn't really talk about leadership and shaping the future. More encouragingly, the Royal College of Nursing had a campaign a couple of years ago. I don't know if people in the room were aware of this. It was called Every Nurse an E-Nurse, and this is about recognising nurses need to get much more engaged in leading and shaping this technology. And this was supported by NHS Digital, who aim to improve health and social care by making better use of technology. However, earlier this year, the Royal College of Nursing published a consultation on the digital future as a consequence of this Every Nurse an E-Nurse. And they found that there were nurses getting involved and other healthcare professionals getting involved in technology, but it was extremely patchy. And what ended up was that nurses were often blamed, or healthcare professionals often blamed technologists for not understanding their world, and technologists blamed the health professionals for not understanding their world. And so one of their conclusions is that we need to work much more closely together to really emphasize the sort of necessity of safety, and really get the value and benefit. Because what I don't see in all of this is a common narrative that binds all of this together. There's no real strong philosophical narrative around digital health and digital humanism that I think connects all this. Tim Lieberecht, who's a technologist and also a relatively rare thing, a humanist in Silicon Valley, talks a lot about artificial intelligence, big data, and the quantification of things. And he says that, this move makes us lose sight of some of the more emotional and social aspects of our lives, and is calling for a radical humanism amongst technological companies. And he says that, we need to think about how we educate and prepare, and looking at components like, what is that addresses things like moral agency, human nature, self-awareness, human rights, amongst technological developments and the training of technologists. So there's really three questions I suppose this poses for me and hopefully for you. So how can we protect our service users and patients' best interests in this digital world? How can we prepare healthcare professionals better for what's coming along? And how can we shape the future of technology that more reflects the sort of digital humanist agenda? And I would suggest that we need to think about our education system. I mean, could be vast, but I would suggest that in our programs, our healthcare professional programs, we need to incorporate much more around the digital humanities. I know some universities have started to do this, but to really begin to explore some of these aspects and the moral and ethical issues that this provokes. I would suggest we need more digital champions in practice to help our current workforce adapt and question and get more involved in shaping. I think we need digital therapists to work to do sort of postgraduate programs focused on digital health, and also hybrid research practitioners to help us move the agenda forward. And linked to research, I do think we need to think about how we participate in getting, as nurses and healthcare professionals, get involved much more in research in digital health. And there are many calls through the KTPs, acronym alert, Knowledge Transfer Partnerships. This is through Innovate UK, and this is working with healthcare, small and medium-sized enterprises, working and bidding for money to help develop technology in local areas. And this is free for, open to us to apply for. But I think we should put digital humanism at the centre of those bids, so that we begin to alert people to the importance of this. I mean, I've looked also what at the future, and there are some encouraging signs. NHS Digital Academy recently launched, just this year in April, a new cohort of digital leaders. It's a program for developing leaders around this sort of technology. Unfortunately, I think it was pitched rather narrowly to groups of people who were already, in fairly senior roles. I don't think it was really pitched to the right people, but at least it's happening. And one of the criteria for acceptance was that you had to have 5 years experience in informatics or digital technology, and that excluded quite a lot of people, I would suggest. But at least they're starting to think about this, so there are opportunities for us to get involved. Then there's Eric Topol and the Health Education England's review, and they're starting to look more broadly at the healthcare workforce and what do we need to do to prepare the healthcare workforce for a digital future. And then there's the Economic and Social Research Council, University of Liverpool, along with 17 other academic partners, are working to look at taking a much more holistic view of how technology is impacting on our lives, and how do we need to prepare better for this. So I think there are plenty of opportunities, and I'd urge all of us to try and get involved in ways, and perhaps some of you already are, and I'd be interested to hear after this talk of your experiences of this. I'm certainly working on a bid with a company called Alliance Health, who produce scanning. And it's very exciting, but it's a whole new world, completely outside my comfort zone. But I think it's something we need to start thinking about. So I urge you, this is a sort of plea to try and get involved, because I think it's an important aspect of practice, because I think this does challenge our central position as carers, as healthcare workers, our belief that we are the only providers of compassionate care. And, we need to maintain personhood. It's a core component. We're told by our patients that that's what they want. And I think digital humanism provides us an important narrative. It provides a distinct and simple vocabulary around humanising healthcare. Because in the 14th century, there was a cultural revolution that culminated in the Renaissance, where humanists changed the world, changed our thinking. And perhaps it's time for us to get involved and start a new revolution in digital healthcare, actually led by healthcare professionals. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yesterday, we were challenged by Kathy about the urgent issues around population health. And today, we've had another big challenge placed at our doorstep in terms of digital humanism. So life's not comfortable at the moment in healthcare, that's for sure. So now you've got an opportunity to come back to Steve, ask questions, comments, whatever.
Hi, Steve.
Hi.
Mandy Kenny from La Trobe University in Australia. I've got a question for you. So in the Australian context, there's a big push around telehealth, telemedicine. And I just wondered about your thoughts about it being used as an economic rationalist strategy in terms of cost cutting.
Yeah.
One of the things that I guess I struggle with, I'm a professor of rural health, and we see almost the government promoting telehealth as a solution for equitable access, which means that we're sitting 85-year-old people in front of computer screens and telling them that that's how they'll get their healthcare delivery. And I think one of the things I always ponder with is the role of care navigators, of case managers actually sitting with them. But of course, that sort of defeats. So I just wondered if you could make some comment about that sort of idea of losing the humanising healthcare through an economic rationalist approach to cost saving.
No, I think that's the narrative, I think, across the world, that digital healthcare, telehealth, and those are the solution to this big problem. Perhaps part of it is, but and I know that when I was doing this work and talking to people about this, some people say, look, the digital movement, the technology is just a vehicle for consumerism, and that we shouldn't get involved. You know, it distracts us from focusing on what's really important, which is the humanized element, the flourishing of, but we've got to get involved. We need to, and I just worry that the solutions that are happening out there are driven by technologists who may not know what it's like to be a service user with a particular condition and a particular issue. I mean, my mother, as an example, at 88, she worries more about the microwave, and sort of operating that. She has no involvement with the internet. I know there's a lot of 88-year-olds who do and use, do online banking and all sorts, but she would really struggle with using technology in that way. But I see it as part of the solution, and that we probably need to embrace it, because that's the way things. And there's a lot of money going into this. If you want to have things supported, research, new education initiatives, and so on, if you've got a technology sort of slant to it, it's much more likely to. And you can add in an economic evaluation and show economic impact. Then it's much more likely, in my experience, to get sort of supported and funded. But I just think we have to have a conversation as academics across the health professions, including medicine, and say, look, we need to have a humanism narrative that supports and challenges some of this and thinks about things from a patient service user perspective. And I was in a group of, it was mainly technologists, and I introduced this idea of digital anthropology and digital humanism, and it was a bit, the room went quiet, and it was like, the bale of, what's it? Tumbleweed. Sorry? Tumbleweed moment. It was a tumbleweed moment. And then I explained what we were meaning here, and because we're looking at developing medical technologies, and we want a humanising focus, because that links with what I was talking about, the work of Todres and Galvin and so on. And because this is so outside their comfort zone, so we've got to, and what's heartening is that organisations like Google and so on are starting to say, actually, and Apple are starting to say, we need to think about this, because otherwise these technologies are going to be obsolete, because they won't be used, they won't be engaged with. But of course, there are big safety issues for us to consider as well, and to protect our patients. But what I see at the moment is people standing back as sort of bystanders, letting it happen without really throwing in any comment whatsoever. Hope that answers. Thank you.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for that. It was great. I want to say really, I'm declaring interest. I work for a technology company. Oh. I'm really glad that you kicked out the whole digital immigrant, digital native. I think there's not a shed of evidence that supports that, by the way.
Yeah.
And my experience, I spend my life going into universities dealing with older audiences, just ignore that. All the evidence says that digital immigrants deal with technology better once they get their head around how it's used.
Yeah.
But I just want to say two things to you, if you don't mind. Take heart, really. I've been in the partnership working group here.
Yeah.
and listening to nurses taking control of the introduction of the new standards, and lots of pan groupings that are taking place across the country, and looking at the way technology can enhance those standards are going to be introduced. It's worth, you'd have enjoyed being on this, listening to that, because that debate was really good. And the second thing is that there are, I work with your own university, and you've got a great team who have got hold of, we've worked in partnership, I think, with you in order to create a assessment system that actually enables two things. One is that the quality of the assessment arguably goes up. Actually, that's one of the good things about technology. Seemingly, I'm not quite sure why, but the quality of the feedback seems to go up. And I think the other thing is that people are freed up when you get it right to do the things that they really want to do, to do the person-centered stuff. We've got academics in this room who spend hours calculating hours. It's a crazy use of their time. They're really, really good at doing other things than doing that. They spend loads of time marking, by which they mean checking. They really want to be freed up to do it. So I hear what you're saying, you're absolutely right. And I'd also say, just finally, please let the technology companies in.
Yes.
We want this. I mean, I'm not a technologist. I get learning, I think. Yeah. And I want to be in the room to hear this. I'm afraid what you do, university, I'm sorry to not, but you bring your own technology departments in. And if I were you, I'd kick them out, my experience, because I've worked with technology people who know about and are keen to understand how we can make the thing more human and make sense of it. The best comment I've ever had about what we've done is it's a piece of technology that makes sense. Yeah. That's what we want to achieve, but we need to be in the room to also do that.
Yeah. Thank you. I think it's a really good observation, and it is heartening to hear that things are going, and I recognise that. I see good examples of where change is being, and there's good cooperation between industry and healthcare and university, and it's great. I think it's very patchy. I don't think but I think the knowledge transfer partnerships is a great opportunity, a great vehicle for us to be doing more. And I don't disagree about, going straight to the companies, the digital companies, and inviting them in and having that dialogue. And that seems to be, and I've seen the benefits and outcomes of doing that. But I do still worry that there isn't a sort of joined up narrative around all of this and around us working together, and worry about the risks really of what can. But technology has got the solution to a lot of the problems we face. So absolutely, thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much for your presentation, Steve. I thought it was brilliant. I confess I'm a digital immigrant. I'm quite excited that we have the potential with the new standards for nurse education to really bring digital into the curricula. And I think the universities, I would suggest, are probably a bit behind in terms of digital technologies compared to, say, our hospital trusts, our medical research, delivery, etc. I think, yes, I can definitely see that this is the way forward and a place with the digital technologies in managing long-term conditions, etc. But I think where you've really struck a note today with the digital humanism is, I'm going to be honest, I do have a problem with a robot in a room with an 85-year-old who has dementia. And, they need that social interaction and that human contact. And I personally don't think you can get that from the robot. So I think the digital humanism that you've really brought to the fore for me today, I think we really have to embrace that to make sure that we're not making compassionate care mechanistic and, Thank you. Yeah, I suppose, in a way, my response, although that wasn't so much a question, more a comment, I think we've won the argument about sort of